Senator, Chair Pham, Vice Chair Anderson, thank you. My name is Michael Anderson with Sightline Institute. Is Sarah doing as well? Should I launch into
No, why don't we wait until Sarah actually presents?
Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for the time today. I'm with Sightline Institute. We're a regional sustainability think tank. I'll be talking about the concept of modernizing inclusionary zoning in Oregon in the context of the lessons we can learn from Portland, implementing and then adapting such a program over the last 10 years. We're a research-based institution, so I'll start with some recent research. This came out earlier this year from University of California, Berkeley. It looks at the effect of new housing supply on displacement and exclusion. Concludes, to be brief, market rate housing development will undoubtedly help alleviate the housing affordability crisis at the city or regional level and at the neighborhood level. New subsidized housing development helped slightly more than market rate housing construction to alleviate displacement and exclusion. So to summarize the summary, market rate apartments are good and subsidized apartments are also good. And in some ways, they're even better. The trick, though, is that homes are also expensive, as you all know so well. Here's a typical range for the subsidy per unit for a LIHTC home at 60% AMI in Oregon. And here's that range for a market rate home. Of course, there's no public subsidy on net required on average for a market rate home in general. So in light of the finding from the last paper, we could say, yes, absolutely. If we have money, let's spend it to reduce the displacement and exclusion, but let's also not get in the way of the also good thing that we also want, right, by doing so. So inclusionary zoning is a concept to try and get both of these good things. In its simplest form, the form I'll be talking about it today, it is to say, in all new buildings, perhaps over a certain size, a certain percentage of them need to be set aside for at lower prices for people with less money. There's good reason for this to be a good thing, both at the building level, at the neighborhood level, at the school district level, at the coffee shop level. It's good for people to know each other. It's good, it's useful to society for people with different incomes to know one another. So ideally, that's what we're trying to achieve with inclusionary zoning programs. Some legislative history: in 1999, they were banned by the Oregon legislature preemptively. No such programs existed at the time. For several years, there were efforts to lift the ban, supported by some cities, and the supporters, including some of those cities, asked for full local design flexibility. Let us design these programs. That did not pass. And so in 2016, there was a compromise measure that legalized inclusionary zoning at the local level, but subject to some sideboards that were defined by the state. Such local programs could only target exactly 80% AMI as a mandate. They couldn't apply to projects below 20 homes. No funding was required, but a single dollar would be enough. There was no specific amount of funding that was required. And no check-ins were required at any point on whether the policy was working as intended. So those were the compromise sideboards put in place at the time.
Michael, I'm sorry. I'm getting a request from the committee assistant that the old version of the slides, so that we're just going to take 1 second to switch out the slides.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Great. So I'll be looking at
the newer version.
Okay. So should I pause for now?
Yeah, just pause for 1 second.
Great. Thank you so much.
And then, yeah, we'll let Joe switch out the slides.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm wondering if the slides are really that different.
Sorry. The revised slides do include a happy chart at the end that I don't want you all to miss.
Okay, I'm glad to know. It will be worth it.
Yeah, thank you. Shall I move forward?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Moving through the recent past. We talked about the legislative history here in Oregon. After this 2016 law passed, one city in the state has implemented this program as they're allowed to, and that is, of course, Portland. In 2016, within a few months, quickly passed a program subject to those specs that were defined by the legislature. All the analyses since then have basically agreed on some of the key characteristics of that program as implemented in Portland, and that's what I'll be talking about for the rest of this bit. It was fully funded for rentals in the central city. I'll talk about what fully funded means in a minute, but conceptually, it was fully funded in the central city, and then there was a somewhat different and less well-funded program outside the central city. So in the surrounding neighborhoods, it was underfunded on net. That was found by two different estimates by the city conducted in 2016 and 2023. Let's talk a little bit about the economics of a program like that. So this is, if you can imagine, this is the cost of building a new apartment building or maybe just a single home in an apartment building. And if the cost of building something matches the rent that people are willing to pay to live in a certain place, then you can build that building. That's how buildings are built. The new building may be a little bit higher quality. It can compete on quality, if not on price, and people are willing to move into it. And that's what makes the building able to exist, pay back its loans. If you add cost to the construction of the building, and this is the case whether it's mandatory boat parking, whether you have a requirement for a fancy roof on a new home, or if it, though we may believe in the benefits differently, if you require some of the homes to be provided below market rent, all of those have the same effect, and it's to create effectively a higher cost of building that building. So you could think of it as like an additional cost in that lost rent that's not being collected from those below market homes. The problem is, as a developer, if you are forced to cover the cost of that lost rent and you're trying to bring it into a market with that market price, you don't get to choose that, to set that higher market price. People aren't going to pay it. They aren't going to live in your building. And so as a result, the building won't be built. And what happens then is people, of course, if the population's going up, if incomes are going up, they're bidding against each other. They drive up the prices of the rent in those older buildings. And so after that happens, then the building may be built with the mixed incomes, but only after people in all these older buildings are paying a higher rent. And so that's the phenomenon of how an underfunded program can result in higher rent payments to everybody in the city, not just even in the building, but in the city itself. And that's exactly what happened in Portland after this, in some areas, underfunded program was created. This was not the only factor, of course, in the situation in Portland, but that top year, 2017, is the year the program was introduced. This is homes permitted in Portland per capita, and then after that, it fell off sharply as those homes worked their way through the pipeline. And some buildings were continuing to pencil, but at a much lower rate. If you think about this specifically in the context of the desired benefit of the below market homes being created by the program, we can look at the projections. This was when the program was created, and the actuals. This is how many below market homes were produced by the program. And let's look at this gap between those projected and actuals and zoom in a little bit. If you imagine what that represents, it's 1,300 missing affordable homes because of the underperformance of this program. 50% less tax-based growth from new homes at all, so the city had less money to do anything with, and thousands of unbuilt market rate homes, in addition to those 1,300 lost affordable homes, all as consequences of an underperforming program. Again, not entirely due to the design of this program, but partially due to that. Here's one example put together by the city of Portland. During this period, 13, 16 to 19 unit buildings just below the threshold, right? The 20 unit requirement. So a developer was deliberately underbuilding the zoning in order to avoid the program mandate. Everybody gets upset when this happens. This is obviously not the intent of the program, and it's obviously bad for tenants and home buyers when people are not building as many homes as they could. This is an extreme example, but it's not totally unrepresentative. If you look at all the sites in the city over this period of time, before the mandate, just under 25% of homes were in that 12 to 19 unit range. And during the underfunded mandate, it was just under half of homes. So a huge jump in the number of homes that are sort of bending over backwards to avoid the program. Again, not the intent of the program. During that 2017-22 period, there were no check-ins on the program by the city, so there's no assessment of what was going on, what could be done about it. There were many reasons for this, but it's always hard to do non-urgent things, right? Or important but non-urgent things. In 2024, though, the city did complete a check-in and agreed with the county to fully fund an inclusionary zoning program. Here's the basic contours of it. It used a 10-year tax abatement from the future buildings, so the buildings that would otherwise not have been built, perhaps, to fully offset the lost rents in those buildings. And it prioritized 60% AMI homes in higher-priced neighborhoods. In those first 6 months after those reforms were made, 20 projects opted in, so not bending over backwards, but now trying to get into the program, trying to participate in this mixed income housing program. 1,542 total homes, of which about 120 or more were below market. Each of these, if you remember the $300,000 per home figure for the LIHTC project, each of these averaged about $220,000 in waived revenue per 60% AMI home. So a smaller total figure. And this is also coming from multiple governments. So from the perspective of each of those local governments, it's sort of like a matching grant program where different governments are chipping in to cover that sum. It's a good deal for the public in general and for each government in particular. Here's some examples of projects that were made possible that are moving forward as a result of that change. And here's that happy chart. If we look at projects entering the pipeline after that funding change in Portland, it returned to a little bit under 25%, where that smaller format, so about the previous rate, which to me doesn't indicate everything about the program, but it's the best sign we've got empirically that things are working more or less as intended when the city revisited the program to fully fund their mandate. Other places around the country and the world that have been moving away from unfunded inclusionary zoning: Washington State, Florida, Baltimore, Illinois, Greater Paris. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about any of those anytime. To conclude, just to share a few lessons of what we've learned in the last 10 years, it's important to keep it optional for jurisdictions. This program is too high maintenance for some jurisdictions, for sure, and may not be right for others, just for other reasons. More local design flexibility can work if it's fully funded. That's what the 60% opt-in program that Portland created is basically doing in a complicated way. But I think that showed that it is useful to have local design flexibility to adapt to local goals, as the cities had requested when they first came before the legislature. However, you do need that funding, which is, I think, the great lesson of Portland's experience so far, to actually make it work. And to make sure that you get that funding and you don't overfund it, which you can also do. It's important to check in regularly, because as economic conditions are changing, as interest rates are changing, as everything else is changing, it's important to see that the program continues to be in balance. Thank you so much for your time. Any questions I can take?
I don't see any questions. Well, we can save that for actually at the end of the panel too. It looks like we have Sarah Zahn, who is testifying remote, up next. Sarah, welcome. If you could just introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair Pham and members of the committee. And I'm sorry that I'm here remotely today, but I'm happy to be with you. I don't have slides to share. I just have a kind of a prepared set of remarks. And I want to just send an appreciation to Michael for all his hard work on the program and a really great explanation of kind of where we've come from and where we are today with the inclusionary housing program, specifically in Portland, which is the experience I'll talk about today. So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Sarah Zahn, and I'm currently the Managing Director of Development with Security Properties. We are based in Seattle, but we are an active developer and owner-operator of housing in the Portland area, and I call Portland home. Previously, I worked with a company also based in Portland called Urban Development Partners. I'm also here today in my role as the president of Oregon Smart Growth, which is a coalition of developers, investors, and professionals committed to building walkable, sustainable communities across Oregon. I really appreciate the opportunity, as I said, to talk about inclusionary housing, or inclusionary zoning, as it's often called, and to share perspective from the development side about how it's working in Portland, which right now, as Michael said, is still the only jurisdiction in the state that has adopted such a program. I want to be really clear at the outset. I'm not here to argue against inclusionary zoning or housing. I believe in mixed income communities and the need for affordable housing options in every neighborhood and many buildings. What I do want to talk about today is just how to make inclusionary housing more effective, more predictable, and better calibrated so it can deliver on its goals without stalling the very housing production that we all want to see. So I'll start by just talking a little bit about Portland's experience and my experience in Portland. So I served on both the city advisory group that informed the initial inclusionary housing program in Portland that was adopted back in 2017. And then I also served on the more recent work group alongside Michael that created policy recommendations during the city's calibration study a few years ago. In Portland, I've worked on a few projects that have fallen under Portland's inclusionary housing system, including a project at 550 MLK. It's 158 units, and another project called the Splash Apartments on the east side, which is another 210 units, so a little over 375 units in total. 550 MLK is in the central city and was able to move forward from the outset with the full property tax exemption. Calibration Splash, on the other hand, was outside of the central city and was, as a result, much slower to obtain financing and experienced delays in starting construction. The 2023 calibration provided Splash with a much needed call to equilibrium that enabled it to move forward into financial feasibility. The recalibration to allow many more projects to qualify for the full 10-year property tax exemption in Portland and become fully funded under the mandate as described by Michael really demonstrates how sensitive housing production is to small shifts. When we underwrite projects, we're looking at dozens of variables that all have to line up just right. Construction costs, interest rates, rents, investor expectations, all of it. Even small changes in the inclusionary housing requirements or incentives or lack thereof can make or break feasibility for us. The fully funding that Portland did was a really significant step in the right direction. We still have issues or have opportunities for improvement of the program. One of the ones that we talk about a lot in Portland is what we call the misalignment in the program, where the way to describe that best is that we get 10 years of a property tax exemption in exchange for creating inclusionary zoning units in a building. But the inclusionary zoning requirement is 99 years of affordability restriction. So 10 years for 99. That's kind of a miscalibration. On paper, you can make that look balanced if you do a net present value calculation. But in practice, it's just not comparable. It's really hard to underwrite a 99-year obligation against a 10-year benefit. Investors do not treat that as a wash in the program. So that calibration gap is kind of what I'm talking about when the benefit doesn't fully offset the cost and the project's risk profile ends up out of sync with what capital markets can support. So the bottom line is the result is uncertainty, and uncertainty is what stops projects from moving forward. So even the best intentioned policy is great, but if the math doesn't pencil or if the rules may change midway, investors can take their money to other projects elsewhere and the project is less likely to get built. Another key issue or a key thing to think about in inclusionary zoning is flexibility. Michael talked a little bit about that. So in Portland, for example, you can build your units on site, which was what most developers do, or you can pay a fee in lieu. And you can pay into an affordable housing fund instead of building those units on site. In Portland, that's technically available, but the fee is set very high, so almost no one uses it because it's considered extremely punitive. And that program was designed that way. There are other states or jurisdictions that focus on that fee in lieu as an option that they want developers to be able to take. So Seattle's a good example. Developers can choose to build on site, or they pay into the mandatory housing affordability fund or fee, and the fee is not cheap. It still represents a meaningful contribution, but it provides a lot of certainty to developers because it's a one-time fee, and they can underwrite it. Lenders like it, investors like it. And then the city is able to use that funding strategically for affordable projects where they make the most sense. I'm not saying that that's the right solution for Portland or even for jurisdictions, but I think it's important to acknowledge it as a choice, a reasonable choice, and providing flexibility. So while Portland may and has decided the way that it's designed its program, that it would prefer to see those units built on site, other jurisdictions may want to make a different choice. So I would just encourage us to think about how to be most flexible in our state if we're thinking about how we're designing these programs. So let's see. So I guess the broader point is we need a system with options and not a one-size-fits-all mandate. And then finally, just kind of from the perspective of the development community, again, I don't think that, generally the development community, and certainly the position of Oregon Smart Growth is we're not saying don't do inclusionary zoning. We're just saying continue to focus on doing it in a way that works. Michael talked a lot about those priorities, but I think the three things that I would focus most on are alignment, is making sure that incentive truly offsets the obligation. That's going to look different in every community in Oregon. Flexibility, so allow paths like the reasonable fee in lieu or varying affordability levels tied to project type, unit type, location, and then predictability. Keeping the rules stable long enough for projects to be financed, built, and delivered is really important because unpredictability can be the death of a project. So when those conditions exist, we actually produce housing, both market and affordable, at the pace we need here in Oregon. When they're uncalibrated, we get what we're seeing now, which is a dramatic slowdown in production, rising costs, and fewer units overall. So the state's role, this conversation is timely. Senator Pham and others have been looking at ways to make inclusionary housing more flexible and more effective. I think the opportunity here is to build on Portland's experience, lessons learned. We were the test case. Craft a framework that gives local jurisdictions maximum flexibility when they're thinking about implementing an inclusionary housing program, and ensure better calibration and local accountability statewide. That could mean setting clear guidelines for what constitutes a fair exchange between affordability requirements and incentives. It could mean requiring jurisdictions to study cost effectiveness of different models and what a full offset of the affordability requirement really looks like, or to test fee and lieu structures that actually get used. Ultimately, inclusionary housing should be one tool among many, along things like SDC reform, tax incentives, streamlined permitting, design review reforms to get more housing built across income levels. It should never be the reason a project doesn't happen. If we can recalibrate inclusionary housing to truly balance cost and benefit, or continue to focus on that recalibration, we'll have a policy that helps and not hinders our shared goal, which is more housing for Oregonians at every income level. So thank you all very much for the chance to share these thoughts. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and working with all of you on how we make these tools work best as possible statewide. And I know there'll be questions at the end, and I'll stick around and I'm available. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Okay, last up, Sarah, the other Sarah.
Good afternoon, Chair Pham, Vice Chair Anderson, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Radcliffe, and I work with Habitat for Humanity Portland region. And I am here to talk with you about how homeownership could potentially intersect with inclusionary zoning. How do I advance the slide?
Use the wheel or the left click, I think.
There we go. So just to start briefly with why homeownership matters. Homeownership is housing stability. Renting in this country just doesn't afford the stability and permanence of a 30-year fixed affordable mortgage. Imagine trying to freeze the rent for 30 years. That's not likely, but homeowners get that routinely, and that allows homeowners to both predict their costs and to save. When homeownership is combined with permanent affordability, so that's homes that are affordable to purchase for today's families and also deed restricted as affordable for future generations, that is one of the best strategies that we know as an anti-displacement tool. that allows development without displacing current communities, and it facilitates economically, racially, culturally diverse neighborhoods in the future. We also have a huge racial disparity in terms of homeownership, a disparity that hasn't improved nationally or locally since passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And there's huge demand for affordable townhouses and condos. In the 80s, 40% of homes were entry-level, new homes were entry-level homes. Today, the private sector has almost completely stopped producing new affordable homes for sale. So we need new tools to bring affordable homes into the market. Meanwhile, public funding for developing new affordable homes is in short supply. I'm not going to get into the details of this slide, but suffice it to say that OHCS, with their Lift for Homeownership program, was oversubscribed in 2025 and will be in this coming biennium as well. There's just simply not enough public dollars to support homeownership at the level that we need. So that has programs like Habitat for Humanity thinking, all right, the private sector is not building affordable homes. There isn't enough public money to go around to build affordable homes. What about trying to squeeze some affordable condos into privately developed buildings? Is that possible? And here we have hit a wall in Portland because Portland's inclusionary zoning program does not work on the condo side. You heard Michael and Sarah describe the public subsidy that offsets the inclusionary requirement on the rental side. Well, there is no corollary subsidy on the condo side. So that means that as developers like Sarah are doing the math to figure out, all right, I'm building this new building. Should I make it a condo or a rental? The city is very heavily putting its finger on the scale of rental versus condo. Before 2025, that may have been substantially attributable to, so Portland's inclusionary zoning program has not produced affordable condos. But to be fair, condos weren't being built across the state anyways. And pre-2025, that was probably substantially attributable to Oregon's stringent condo defect liability laws. But this past session, the legislature passed HB 3746, which brought Oregon's condo defect liability scheme on par with other Western states. So that could change. But in Portland, we won't realize the potential of that change unless we figure out how to make inclusionary zoning work for condos. And if we do figure out how to make it work, there's actually tremendous possibility. There's serious planning in the works for thousands of new homes in Portland right now. I'm just scrolling through some images of OMSI and the Lloyd District. So plans are in the works for thousands of new homes. If some of those buildings could be condos and some of those condos could be affordable, we could quickly scale up affordable homeownership opportunities with very modest public investment. So really, as Michael described, the devil's in the details. Inclusionary zoning could either hamstring that development or we could leverage that development. And that's why it's so important to get it right. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for those really just scintillating and educational presentations. Senator Vice Chair Anderson.
If I could, thank you, Chair. Michael, are there other states in your research, states that had the zoning, inclusionary zoning, and also failed and then have come back? And did they come back with a similar program funding? Or will this be a one-off, us trying it once again?
Right. Yeah, you're saying that, Chair Pham, Vice Chair Anderson, thank you for the question. Various states are in the process of going through a similar journey. So each journey has been a little bit different, various cities. So I mentioned Baltimore. What happened there was that the city imposed a program, and then every time the building was subject to the requirement, the developer would knock on the mayor's door and say, hey, this is not going to work. I don't have the money the spreadsheet doesn't come out to zero. And the mayor would say, okay, forget about the IZ requirement. So that understandably got a lot of people upset. And so Baltimore then decided to change itself to create a funding program. In Illinois, the state came in and created a tax abatement program that didn't previously exist. And that's having great results in Chicago and Evanston right now, as these previously malfunctioning programs are becoming more productive on both the market and below market side. In Washington State, there had been some local programs that were funded and some that were not. And some neighborhoods where it was funded in Seattle and somewhere it was not. And the state recently passed a law saying you need to allow homes near transit stops. And as part of that, it came in and said, and here's a package of tax abatements and breaks that would offset the cost of a required affordability mandate that came with that legislation. New York State is in the process of going through this journey as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, we will continue this conversation. As was mentioned, I do plan on introducing a bill as a committee bill about some of these potential reforms to make sure that we can learn from these lessons and make sure the state is supporting a model of inclusionary zoning that is actually effective while being flexible to local needs. So thank you all so much for this presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving right along. Thank you all for your